name is Kristen Smith. I'm a researcher at Headwaters Economics. And today I'm asking the big question, how do we fund equitable mitigation and adaptation? My broader argument is that communities need access to stable and predictable revenue to adapt to climate change, particularly if that adaptation is going to be equitable. And we know that part of the solution to adapting to climate change will include infrastructure investments. So under our current system, state and local governments are largely responsible for funding and financing public infrastructure. In fact, when you look at the research, about 75% of our public infrastructure is built by state and local governments. So what are the current models for funding that infrastructure? Well, it's usually a mix, including taxes and fees. However, many local governments are highly constrained by state policies by how they can raise revenue. So increasingly, communities have become reliant on things like borrowing and debt financing. You can think about the municipal bond market. Also, federal grants from the government are a big part of the picture. So access to things like credit and federal funds are big issues when we think about climate adaptation. Today, I'm going to focus on federal grants, and specifically, I'm going to take a deep dive into a competitive grant offered by FEMA, the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, often called the BRIC grant. So BRIC was announced as a replacement to the pre-disaster mitigation program, and the first funding cycle was in fiscal year 2020. It was widely lauded as being the first FEMA grant to include climate change in its scoring criteria. It was also lauded for its focus on equity. So where did the money go? Well, this past July, FEMA announced their preliminary selections. We did an analysis and found some pretty striking geographic inequities. This map shows you where the majority of the funding went, and note that 94% of the funding went to wealthy East and West Coast states. We and other researchers have found that most of the places that received BRIC funds have high property values and moderate to low social vulnerability. So places with low property values or really high social vulnerability were largely left behind. So the biggest winner in this funding cycle was California, and they received 24% of BRIC's entire budget. And after that, New Jersey, the state of Washington, and Washington, D.C. received the next highest allotments. Now, of course, that's not to say these are bad choices. What is important to point out is, why did the interior United States largely miss out? And we have a couple ideas about why that happened. First, places that are rural or historically underserved face many barriers in accessing federal funding. They often don't have the capacity or expertise to navigate the maze of available federal funding programs and submit time-consuming, highly technical grant applications. Second, the scoring requirements often disadvantage rural and lower capacity places. Things like local matches, building codes, and hazard mitigation plans are often a struggle for lower capacity places to come up with. In addition, the benefit cost analysis requirement is really problematic for lower income communities because it really favors places with higher property values. And finally, there was also a lack of transparency in this funding cycle around the grading and scoring. So if a community didn't get the funds this year, but they want to resubmit, they're not getting the information that they need from FEMA to resubmit and be more competitive. So part of my research at Headwaters Economics is about how we can remove barriers to federal funding. So I want to propose a couple solutions. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And first, the simplest solution is simply to change the scoring. There are many ways to make competitive grants more equitable. We can have a stratified scoring system so small towns aren't competing against big cities. We can waive local match requirements in the benefit cost analysis for certain places and projects. Inevitably, however, competitive grants will never be the solution for our most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. We just need different tools for equitable climate adaptation. I want to give you two models of different strategies. Both of them use direct federal investments. The first model is the American Rescue Plan. It provided historic investments to local governments this past year to assist with COVID impacts. However, it was one-time windfall revenue, which is incredibly hard for local governments to leverage into long-term planning. So we need to do some more research about the long-term impacts and the pros and cons of this approach. Another model is the federal government's general revenue sharing, which existed between 1972 and 1986. It provided $4.5 billion per year in direct monetary transfers to cities and local governments. It was hugely popular and could be a good model for funding adaptation. So we know that local governments need access to stable, predictable revenue to make long-term and strategic decisions. We have an opportunity right now to make changes to our public finance systems to ensure that all types of communities have access to the resources that they need. We can use fiscal policy to build a more equitable future. So what are your ideas? What are your questions and comments? Give me a holler at chris@headwaterseconomics.org.